Hi, and welcome to season 3 of Credible Live. We are here with Phil Vigeant, and he is the CEO of PlantFusion. And I feel like if I told you everything about him, it would take up the whole episode because he's accomplished a lot in his life in the supplement industry. And then, of course, we have Brian Fitzpatrick, CEO of Credible.
Well, Phil's a trailblazer, as we've indicated, and a pioneer. And I've always learned that the pioneers are the ones that end up with the arrows in their backs.
Yeah, I have a few of those.
Yeah, I bet you do. I understand that. So, Phil, one of the things that really, talking about being a trailblazer, one of the things that matters most, to me, is partnering with mission-driven CEOs and working with them, because I always find them inspiring, and it's sort of what I am. I'm always focused on the mission. So it's really more than just building a brand, but trying to elevate the standards for an entire industry. And you've spent decades in natural products from your early days to where you are now, and really building this PlantFusion into a premium plant-based allergen-free platform. So could you talk about your personal journey and the mission and what drives you and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Brian, and thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be on your show, and congratulations on all your success in the show and the outreach you have and the following you have. So that's a real accomplishment as well. So
thank you.
But I could go back forever, but I think I was sharing with you and your team previously that, first of all, I would say that one of the best gifts I ever received from my parents was they owned a little health food store when I was a kid back in the 70s. And this is back before there was no Whole Foods, there were no Sprouts stores, you didn't walk into a conventional grocery store and find organic produce, and I could go on and on and on, right? Back then, those little boutique natural product stores were in most decent sized towns, right? They were coming online, I should say, at that point. When I say online, I mean, they were coming, they were showing up in more and more towns because more and more people were starting to go through in the 70s, that movement of, wait, let's question what's going on inside our food supply and everything else. And then also, that's also around the time when people became aware of things like high blood pressure and how sodium was a contributor to that, or diabetes. Plenty of people had diabetes back then. And so people were looking for low sugar foods and things like that. So that was that was some of the genesis, along with the, I'd say the 60s, was a inflection point for people and considering what was going on in their body and the chemicals and the agents and things that are in society. But that was really the start of it for me. And I really say it was the best gift I could ever have, because for them, it started out like a lot of people as a hobby and as a way of life that they, and then it just became a little business. And growing up inside that store was the best, I would say, background or experience I could have ever had for appreciating not just organic food and healthy food, but really what high quality food was really like. Where one of the things that was there was, like, we hear about processed food all the time, but I think that there were so many things, like just basic cheese, like you got real cheese versus Velveeta, right? Or versus, and I could go out and hear or the cheese,
and whatever that was.
Yeah. And the cheese whiz and all these things that were so common back at that time. And I think that, that gift gave me an appreciation for just quality food in general over time. And just, I think, and it really resonated, not just with me, but I had siblings too. And that combined with, I was not a great athlete. I was an average athlete who wanted to be a great athlete, but I played sports as long as they let me play right through college. And I competed, and that was part of it, right? If you're an athlete, you want to, what you're putting in your body, and you're trying to make yourself as fit as possible, et cetera. So all that led me, I think, was sort of the framework or the groundwork for wanting to be in this industry. After I got out of college, I was in the finance industry for a few years in New York. Great experience, great exposure, wouldn't trade it for the world, learned an enormous amount. But realized after just a couple of years there that an entrepreneurial journey was going to be much more appropriate for me, and that's really what got me started. And so that led me to purchase a private label company called Reliance that today makes a lot of organic products and specialty nutritional products, private label products for major retail chains. I can't mention the names of them, but you just think of major natural products retail chains and other even bigger chains where they use Reliance for organic plant proteins, organic or probiotic products, organic multivitamins, etc. So things that are very, I'd say, anchored in what we consider today to be the natural products industry. So that was I was very fortunate to work with a great group of people that shared some of the same vision and plan. We felt like private label didn't have to be a commodity generic product. We really focused at that time on patented and trademarked ingredients. We went really with where the science was in the industry on an individual ingredient to put into a supplement. And I think one of the things we really hung our hat on was, at the time using European extracts, where these, things like ginkgo biloba and St. John's were regulated as pharmaceuticals, and that's how high the quality was of those ingredients. And then also using a lot of patent and trademark ingredients like lutein, which is, one of the best studied lutein products in the world and so forth for eye health. It's just a couple of examples, but that led me to, as a protein supplement taker myself, I have a dairy allergy. It's not a severe one. Some people are anaphylactic to dairy. Fortunately, it was not that severe, but I couldn't take whey protein or calcium caseinate or caseinates, which was the main source of a protein powder back in 2008, 2009, around that time. That was the main source out there. There was also a soy protein, but that had lost its luster because of concerns about it being a phytoestrogen. It also is an allergen. So it tends to give people a lot of gas, and some people can also have a severe reaction to it, but not unlike dairy. And then rice protein was like the only protein source out there. And unfortunately with rice, it's both very bitter. So the flavor spectrum of rice protein, I mean, it is a healthy source of protein, but I have to tell you, it doesn't taste very good. Those people have tried it. And it's also very gritty. The texture is very gritty. So it's not a shake experience someone who enjoys. It's a shake experience that somebody gets through. And then,
right.
And then so it's painful. But so in that process, really started looking all over the world, literally, for different sources of plant proteins that were non-animal, non-allergenic, that would be plant-based or vegan-based, and landed and found pea protein, which at the time was really just a byproduct it was an offshoot of what peas are mostly made for, which is for fiber and starch. A lot of pea starch is what is used in noodles, actually, and so they're big in Asia and so forth. But
so that's like pea protein, like in peas.
Yes, in peas. Yeah, as in the plant pea, as in the vegetable peas. And what's interesting about peas for people like me who like to geek out on these types of things is I'm going to really generalize, but it's about 1/3 starch, 1/3 fiber, and 1/3 protein. So, but nobody knew what to do with the protein. Well, we figured out that we could use that protein because it was actually a very good source of protein, non-allergenic, and checked all those boxes that we were suffering with. And that was the launch and the platform for PlantFusion as a separate brand, separate from Reliance. And that were launched. I worked with a co-founder named Greg Cooper. He'd actually started the brand. I won't go into all that background, but it really, we leveraged what we had as an infrastructure at Reliance, and we're able to launch a brand in this space. Just as I think that the movie Forks Over Knives, which is a very popular one about plant-based nutrition or vegan or vegetarian lifestyle, had come out right around that time. It was sort of the right place, right time. So there was luck, with what the growth and the interest in these alternative sources of protein came about. So that's how it all got started. And so,
I mean, that's a great journey. And I always love sort of connecting the roots from when you were younger. Like I hear that a lot, from a lot of mission driven CEOs. And so it's a great story. And I am familiar with some of those big name brands, and they are big name brands where you're selling some of your products. So very, very impressive. But in order to be successful there, I mean, you have to have some negotiables about like things like product quality and regulatory compliance that truly separate what I would call serious supplement brands from a lot of the noise that's out there. And there's a lot of noise out there, and people don't know what to trust or who to trust. So what are sort of some of your non-negotiables that make your brand the top?
It's a great question. I will say it's a complex answer, so I'll try to boil this down to simple. Because when you look at the hundreds and thousands of ingredients in the industry, and then in the supplement industry, it really, the answer for one type of ingredient may not be the same answer on what defines quality for another one. Because these are plants; they're grown all over the world. Number one, they're grown under multiple types of conditions, and also with any plant or product that comes from nature, there's natural variation in them. There's also what are you trying to do with it? You might want to take a whole herb that isn't standardized for a compound, or you might want a more therapeutic effect with an herb that's been isolated down to a single compound that will have more of a, what I'll call pharmacological or specific impact on your body, similar to maybe the way a drug would impact you. It becomes almost a very isolated compound. So all those things come into that. To answer the question, when you're looking at 1,000 different ingredients over the course of my career, the answer to that question become complex. But I think what we try to do is first of all, non-negotiable for our brand PlantFusion is one thing, and then sort of a general conceptual framework we use to look at ingredients. But one is, for our brand, first of all, it has to be 100% vegan. So there's no flexibility around that. That doesn't mean, I want to be clear, that doesn't mean the products that are not vegan are not good. It's just that we're very clear on our consumer. We're trying to take away the pain of the consumer. I call it doing this, right? They look at the aisle and they're vegan. And one of my friends in the industry, her daughter became a vegan. She said, this is all she does is spend half her time in a supermarket everywhere reading the label, because she's really trying to discern what's in there to figure out if something's vegan. And you can't always just automatically assume that there isn't something else in there, right? So we all know it's a bit of a research project when they're really trying to either feed a family or feed a family member or themselves. So our one platform is vegan, 100% vegan. We won't deviate from that. Another one is being allergen free. We try to be 100% allergen free on everything, because it's not that all allergens affect everybody. But if you see that mother who has a son or a daughter who has dairy allergy or a gluten allergy or a nut allergy, they are what I call them, label scientists, right? They have to sit there and examine almost everything. And you've seen them. We've all had dinner with them in a restaurant, right? When they're severely allergic, it affects their whole lifestyle, right? So we're trying to make it easy and simple for that customer to do that. Again, it doesn't mean that some of those items that have allergens, I love cashews, I'm just not allergic to, and I love almonds, right? But we have to make sure our consumer is really clear that they can take this product and not have to think about that. So those are two big platforms. As it relates to, we look at the ingredient world that we deal with, and it is very diverse. We start with these aren't as absolute as some marketers would like to make them, but they're really clear. One of the first things we look at is, what part of the world is it coming from, right? And we all have heard the disasters of things that come out of China and some parts of Asia and even India and so forth. That doesn't mean everything that comes out of there is bad, but we have to be very discerning about it. So one of the first things I did when I started the brand was, all of our plant protein came out of, all of our pea protein was sourced out of Belgium. So I would be over in Belgium on a frequent basis working with the farm and the company that processes the peas and turns it into a pea protein powder that then we would ship over here to the US and then make our product with. But that was a really, Europe in general has pretty high quality standards. So does Canada on a lot of these ingredients. And that's a better place to buy it than, let's say, other types of other parts of the world where maybe it may have been less expensive, but not as pure and not undergoing some of the same regulatory framework that, the pea protein out of Europe does. So I have a funny story another time about talking with my daughter at the time when I was in Europe, and she said to me, I give it more color at another time, but she asked me where I was, and it was 13. She was 13 years old at the time, and I knew her question was filled with contempt and attitude because she was 13 years old. So she says, "What are you doing? Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm in Belgium." She says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "You're not going to believe this, but I'm actually on a pea farm right now." And there's this long pause, and then she says, "You are so weird." And she said, and her next line is, "Why can't you just have a normal job like Morgan's father?" One of her friends. So that's one of my favorite stories about so all of this great stuff that people love to talk about that I've done, it's completely unvalued by my family. So I just want you to know that. So.
I understand. I don't think my family understands what I do.
Right. So, but anyway, it's I think that's just anecdotal to the process that we go to try to find these best sources. And I've worked with some great team members who've also been, I can't be everywhere. And so obviously we've had really top-notch product developers over the years that have traveled the world and done, been on those same types of trips to really understand it. I have an associate I work with in the industry that does a lot of work with us. And, he was in India for the better part of 3 months. He is Indian, but he was over there to see family. And I'd say a third of that time was traveling through India and looking at, and visiting certain raw material suppliers, ingredient suppliers for organic vitamins and minerals, and be able to really touch it and feel it, as opposed to just assume that the certificate of analysis is correct. So it's different. Our sourcing, standards and so forth vary based on the ingredient because we have to consider a lot of different variables. But I like to think that we try to always buy organic when we can. Whenever we come out with a new product, I've talked about this with, I think, you and Faith. We try to be first, better, or different all the time. Mm-hmm. And in that process, that always requires research. That's not just calling up an ingredient supplier who can ship you a container load or 1,000 kilos or a pallet of an ingredient, because there's plenty of that out there. We have to really weed through navigate the spectrum of suppliers. And I do think that to some degree, being in this space for a long time, like anybody who's in any industry, you learn these things kind of intangibly, how to go through that process.
So it's interesting because I learned, when I was sort of investing in hemp farms, and back in 2018, I learned a lot about like the hemp plant and how the hemp plant just sucks up whatever's in the soil. It's got this capability to actually remediate things in soil, which is okay, unless you're going to turn it into a product and you've got lead in there, right? Yep. So there's growing scrutiny significantly about plant-based proteins and heavy metals and contaminants. Yep. And label accuracy, and even mainstream outlets now have really called out some brands recently. Yep. So, I mean, how do you, like, I know this is a pretty big problem, like in the CBD and hemp and cannabis space that, we have customers on, and as we've expanded into supplements and, this side of the world, you see this scrutiny, but how do you approach that whole batch testing? You talked about COAs and transparency, because consumers don't know how to read COAs. So, right. I mean, they look at it and, they don't know what they're looking at, but you have to have them up there. You have to have them available. And so how do you provide that testing transparency so consumers and partners, whether they're B2B customers or consumers, know that your products are actually clean?
Right. So again, there's a couple of different ways. One thing is I always go back to look at the genesis of the product or the ingredient, because it doesn't matter how transparent you are in one way if you're not looking at, like, you deal with the root cause of those issues at the source of the ingredient, because if those contaminants are in there, you can't take them out very easily. So it's like, you deal with these issues really the best way to deal with them is very proactively in the sourcing from day one. And one other thing that we do before I get to the C of A issue and things like, and the testing and so forth, is an example of plant protein. That's one of the main reasons we've stayed away from rice, which I didn't mention before. Rice is grown in water. You had a great, a lot. It's interesting what you just said about hemp. Rice has the same potential story to it, because rice is grown in water. It's very what I call hydroponic. And water has more heavy metals in it. It has minerals, good minerals too, but it also has, even in the most pristine water, you have a lot of heavy metals that you have to think about. So that's one of the reasons we stay away from rice, because it's much, much higher in heavy metals. And protein is something we take at high doses. It's not like we take 1 gram of protein, right? When we take a protein supplement, we're taking 15, 20, 30 grams, depending, and maybe more than once a day, et cetera. So those are some of the considerations we stay away from rice. That's although it's a good source of protein, if somebody's consuming heavy metals, it's probably the last one you want to take if there's a predisposition or a concern about it. It doesn't mean that if you take some rice protein, I don't want to create scare. I'm not into creating scare. Scare tactics are not great for our industry. So it's just a concern. It's something you have to consider about or look at. It's no different than a man has to look at how much iron he's getting, because that could be a dangerous mineral for them, although it could be great for women. Women are, usually have a problem with not having enough iron. So it is situational, and you have to look at it from a practical standpoint. It's a great example of a mineral that is found in nature that so many women don't absorb very well or don't get enough of, and yet men have to really mitigate this, how much iron they get. So, but once you get past that sourcing issue, first of all, we do a ton of testing, number one, and trying to deal with the transparency of that gets hard, because as much as we have these test results from these third-party labs, we also have to be conscious of just putting that in front of a consumer, because some consumers will start to call that lab. That lab is not prepared. These are business labs. They are so unprepared to deal directly with the consumer, right? So, but what we really try to do is we transfer that information over into documentation. We can give them actual tangible results that they can look at, sink their teeth into, and see an actual result for it. It's done on 2 levels. One is we're looking at raw materials before they come in. In the case of a protein product, That's the majority of what people are digesting. Yes, there are flavors and natural sweeteners in there, but the majority of what people are taking is still a protein supplement. If you have a 21 gram protein, if I use our most common product, is 21 grams of protein, serving size is about 30 grams. So it tells you right there that about 25 grams of that 30-gram serving is from the protein powder itself. And so and it's only about 4 grams or so of flavors and sweeteners and so forth. So with that in mind, the main concern is what's that main ingredient. You look at the main source, which in that case is pea protein, and we're looking at or amaranth and quinoa and some other secondary sources we might use. And we just make sure that that's tested really well. Because again, if that ingredient is off, it doesn't matter what we do with it when we blend it, it's still going to be very high in heavy metals. And then in the end, we do the testing and we share the results with the customer. Sometime on an as-needed basis. It's dangerous to just put things up on a website where you're dealing with a lab that they're not prepared to deal with answers from consumers. So we have to be careful there. But we be as transparent as we can. And I think that in the end, the consumer needs to know. I find more often than not, when you have these media pieces that go out there, there was one recently from Consumer Reports, and candidly, it was incredibly misleading. I know it would shock everybody that media outlets would do something misleading, but it really was sad what they did, and forget about our involvement in it. It was sad for the industry and sad for the consumer, because if you read the report, the theme of it was you really might want to cut down on ingesting protein. Yet most of us, not just us, because of heavy metals, and that's a little bit like saying, I can't even think of a good analogy. It might be like saying, you might not want to work out that much or exercise that much because you could break your ankle. That can happen, but you're kind of missing the larger point. Unfortunately, the piece was very misleading in that regard. And it's sad that we have outlets that operate that way. It was clearly there to create sensationalism, fear and sensationalism, which sells. And that led to a million questions. But, we were able to show people where we landed with that testing and what we had. And I think there's one thing on heavy metals, Brian, that a lot of people should understand. Some of this fear around heavy metals in general, even in the food supply, comes from Proposition 65 out of California, where for a whole variety of reasons that would get way into the weeds, California passed many years ago as a Clean Water Act. Who doesn't want clean water? But what it really turned into was an act that enabled what we call bounty hunter law firms to go. They set standards for heavy metals that were so low that now if you're in California, you'll see warning signs for all these things everywhere. In a car rental facility, you'll see, anybody who lives in California have seen them. They're just oblivious to them now because they're so used to seeing the warning. But it sets a standard for, let's say, lead that's 0.5 micrograms of lead per serving, which is actually much less than what you get in a cup of spinach. When we actually responded to this, we talked about what is naturally occurring in even really good sources of vegetables. And so it was, again, just sensationalism that really misled the consumer. And if you followed that threshold that they used, you wouldn't eat, you would eat very little vegetables because of even organic vegetables, like from the healthiest soil in the world, you still could have heavy metals that would be above that Prop 65 level. And that's just the thing that everybody should try to understand, that if an outlet is using the California standard, it's just fundamentally misleading. And
and it's interesting because sort of beyond consumers, what I'm seeing in sort of the supplement space is that the due diligence that's required from distributors, even payment processors, like we work for payment processors, and what are they concerned about? They're concerned about chargebacks and claims that are being made, right? So somebody buys your supplement and you're making claims, and they want their money back because this thing didn't work, right? So, we have to validate all the claims. We have to look at your COAs. We have to make sure there's nothing bad in your products. And that's what Credible does for the supply chain, including, banks. So, but now we're seeing sort of the stakes getting a little bit higher, like even major marketplaces like Amazon. They're escalating their requirements around documentation, quality, and compliance for any of these supplements. So from your vantage point at PlantFusion, what do you see? Do you see that increasing? Am I imagining this, or?
You're spot on. And in general, it's a very good thing. I think that it's really important because I think, let's face it, supplements can be sold almost anywhere. Just to be clear, a lot of people say it's an unregulated, most media pieces start off with it's an unregulated industry, which is fundamentally false, just so everybody understands that, right? The FDA, by definition, regulates anything we put in our body, right? So it is a regulated industry. It is not as regulated as pharmaceuticals, and that's appropriate because it's not as dangerous as pharmaceuticals.
Do you think it's misregulated or?
No, I actually think it's interesting. It's been a big part of my career in the industry, and I know this is, this topic was going to come up. I think it's appropriately regulated. With that said, because there are so many ingredients in the industry, it's appropriate to look at certain ones in a different way. That doesn't mean that every herb should just be sold, any way we want. We all know that there are herbs and things out there in the wild that could kill us if we eat them, right? So I think that there's an appropriate amount of regulation. I think that for people who aren't aware of it, just to set a foundation, back in 1993, the SHEA was passed. The SHEA is an acronym for the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. That was a proactive bill that the industry got together. I was very involved in that myself. And we got together and we said, hey, we have to be proactive about setting some standards in the industry. And it set up things like structure function claims. It made it really clear. We can't say that this bottle of supplements cures diabetes because that's a disease claim. So we're not allowed to say that. That's flat out against the law. We're not allowed to say that. And companies that do those types of things are prosecuted by the FTC or the FDA. They can't catch everybody, but that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it was setting up a standard for things like structure function claims, which very simply are, hey, this may not cure diabetes, but it might help support blood glucose levels, but you still should see a doctor, right? This isn't going to replace your diabetes medication if you have to regulate your insulin, and so forth and so on. So there are different layers to it. And that was a great framework that I think many parties were very, very happy with. I think if I go forward, if you look at an ingredient like ephedra, that was all the rage back in the turn of 2000. There were a number of deaths from people taking too much ephedra because, simple way I explain ephedra for those who don't remember, it was like high octane caffeine, like super high octane. And for people that had preconditioned heart issues or pre-existing heart issues, it wasn't good for them to take a lot of it. People were taking it for weight loss and stimulation and energy. And it was really not a great. It was an ingredient that absolutely needed some regulation. It was taken off the market. But what we did as an industry, and this is another initiative I was involved in, we said we need to set up adverse event reporting, because one of the things they found with that ingredient, as an example, was that the companies that were selling it were not recording the complaints that were coming in on it, which is a dangerous thing. And so we decided to be very proactive as an industry. The committee I was on, called the Comply Committee, we got a bill passed through Congress using some of our friends in Congress that was called the adverse event reporting piece. And now today, if somebody calls up and says, hey, I had this or this issue with your plant protein, we are regulated by law to submit that to the FDA as an adverse event report. And there's a certain framework around it, which I won't bore you and your listeners with. But I think that we're generally in favor of more reasonable regulation. You're going to find that I think most leaders in the industry and most people that have been in it for a long time and serve on these committees are generally in favor of higher standards, a higher degree of regulation within reason, as long as it's not too heavy and it starts to cut off access for the consumer. Because many of us are also very, what I'd say, freedom oriented or choice oriented in terms of what we do. And we just want to make sure that we're not, in the spirit of regulation, not mitigating access to things that could really help people. Because there are many supplements now that are commonly recommended by mainstream doctors that 20 years ago were being called snake oil. So, and yet there's still snake oil out there, right? Like coenzyme Q10 should be taken for everybody who takes a statin drug. Millions of people take statin drugs. And now many mainstream, not all, but many mainstream cardiologists, when they recommend a statin, will say, hey, you should also supplement your diet with CoQ10 because it's critical for what it might do to deplete CoQ10 levels, and CoQ10 levels are really important. So,
and I think that's the confusion, though, Phil, is that there's so many supplement brands out there, and you've been there from the beginning, setting the standards and building to the standards, right? And so you help set some of those standards, and so you guys are fine in meeting these standards because you helped write them, you've understand it, you've been a pioneer and a trailblazer in this area, but people just don't know what to trust. They don't know what to look for, and they don't know how to validate and verify who's real and who's fake.
I don't envy the consumer in this category, and I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think that I feel like this consumer category is one of the most confusing for the consumers, because I think I was telling a story about even my personal life. People, if I'm out socially and I say, people ask, what do you do? And I used to say years ago, I would just say, oh, I sell supplements. And I would just get a litany of questions, and sometimes extremely personal information people would exchange quickly. And I said to a friend of mine that I was with many years ago, and she would say, I can't even believe what these people tell you about themselves. I don't even tell these things to my doctors, right? And so I think that, what is that indicative of? Not that I'm smart. It's actually indicative of how confused the average consumer is about the whole category, because I think everybody kind of has the same general feeling when they walk into a retail store, they go online regarding supplements. I know I should be taking something, or I know I should be taking this or more of that or whatever, but I really don't know why. I don't know how much. And to your point, I don't know how to get it. I don't know what's quality and what isn't. I think it's one of the categories that has the most conflicting bits of information, that, or I should say flow of information, because it's everything from, I'll call it very pop type media environments, like going back in the day, Dr. Oz and Oprah and those other things, where somebody would come on and just say something that, boy, okay, it was just taken for granted that was an absolute, to doctors who for many years, they're getting better now, but still today, most mainstream medical doctors, family practitioners have no idea what to recommend. They don't know why. Nutrition is not really taught in that. We've all heard this, not taught much which is sad, right? Because that's the foundation of health, right? And
yeah,
you'd think that in general, a family practitioner would be required to have a tremendous amount of knowledge in general nutrition. You'd think that would be required. Maybe not a surgeon, but certainly a general practitioner and people that deal with general health. So, but it's not the way it is. But it's a super confusing category. I don't envy the consumers not in it. My friends that are in the industry, we joke around about, that experience wasn't unique to me that I talk about with people just sharing information. This is the experience that everybody in the industry has when they are out socially and they're meeting people. And I think that part of what you see is people who come into the industry from outside of the industry, within a few years, they're fans. They're not just fans because they sell it. They fall in love with the industry and the products because of what they experience. It doesn't mean that everything we produce is perfect for everybody. And it doesn't mean, we're going to cure cancer. But I think in general, the experience people have once they're exposed to healthy eating, healthy diets, and nutritional supplementation is generally a very positive one.
Well, my doctor started out that way, but I think he got too many lunches and dinners from big pharma reps. So, and he shifted a little bit. Yeah. But in fact, yesterday, even during Trump's press conference about the cannabis industry rescheduling and CBD, even the doctors, there was one doctor who spoke and he said, we weren't taught about this stuff in medical school. This was not there. So it's amazing. And Phil, I could talk to you forever, but we're already past time. This has gone so fast because, first of all, you're fascinating. You got a great background, a great company, and you're always fun to talk to. So we really appreciate you being on Credible Live and talking about all things supplements and natural supplements and plant-based supplements. And we appreciate you being here. So thanks for joining us today on Credible Live.
Well, thank you.
How can people get in touch with you if they wanted to learn more about you and your brand?
You can email me. First of all, you can go on the PlantFusion.com. So that's the website for the brand. And then my email is my name, Philip, with 2 L's, period, and then Vigeant at PlantFusion.com. But they can also just hit info and it'll get to me. Info at PlantFusion.com is fine. And anybody can communicate with me that way. And we'll do our best to get back to them as quick as they can. But anytime we can be a resource, I and the team are very passionate about health and nutrition, and it's really what drives us. There's no finish line. It's like anything else in life, and we're learning things every week and month and year. And we work with a great group of people, and we do our damnedest to make sure that the people who take our products are are getting the best products available in the marketplace, and that we're constantly trying to improve what we're delivering and help people with their health. Because if we help that, I think everybody knows who's had health problems. It's something we all take for granted until you actually have the problem, or a loved one has the problem, and it changes our lives. So
true.
If we can just make everybody 5% healthier, that's a big step in the right direction, you know.
And people will spend a lot of money to get healthy after they're not, right? So
yeah, exactly. We've all been there. So, but it's a great show. Thank you very much for having me on, and it's an honor to be on. And congratulations again for all your success and the success of the show.
Yeah, and I have to say too, like as a consumer, just this season 3 has really been a trend of founders coming on and sharing their stories. And I think just hearing your passion for purity educates these consumers, because someone would be more apt to buy your product over a 4.8 star rating on Amazon, no name company, which has no regulation really, and they just have a bunch of bots giving ratings. Yeah. So no, I really appreciate when we have founders come on and just share their story, clear communication. This is good for you. This will help you. No, we really appreciate that. And Phil, it's been great chatting to you. I definitely want to have you back on. And
yes.
Yeah, I think 2026 is going to be really exciting in the health and wellness industry.
Yeah, it's grown momentum. I think even whether people like the Trump administration or not, I think that there's some stones that are being turned over that, although it may be uncomfortable and maybe not every policy is the right one with RFK and everything, I think that there are really great questions being asked that we should be answering as a country for the health of our constituents and our citizens. And I think that in that process, we will learn more and be better off for it. And I don't think it may not be perfect, but I think it's due. And it may not be appropriate in every case, but I think that these are good questions we need to ask and answer for ourselves, and let people make their choices. I think that's the big thing. I think that's one thing that whether people like what's happening or not, I think there's a theme around this, which is give people more choices as opposed to being prescribed or telling them what they have to do. And I think that really came out of the COVID vaccination issue, where we saw, just the divisiveness of that. I think that I don't think most people were pro-vaccine 100% or anti-vaccine 100%. I think most people were like me and like many others that were saying, no, let's just make sure you have all the information, and then you get to make a choice personally, right?
Yeah, and they were scared too. So there's not a lot of time to make a decision or do a lot of research when you're fearing for your life. So is totally interesting. But I think this is why we're going to see an over $400 billion market in this supplement space before long, and that's really, I shifted into the tech side of this. Because first of all, I'm a big believer in supplements. I've replaced a lot of my pharmaceuticals with natural supplements and changing eating habits. And it's been a learning process for me because everybody's body's different, but you're counting on the quality of the supplements you're taking, because you don't want to spend money, with some type of placebo thing you're throwing in your body. That's right. Just nothing but a carrier oil.
Yeah, so, and those products are out there. Like I think Faith mentioned, what's online. It's a scary world out there. We look at some of what's online, and we're just like shake our head. And the FDA and FTC, I don't care what administration is, they have limited resources. They can't go after everybody. But no, there is. I think most of the people I work with in the industry, I will say, as a whole, I always say it's the loud minority that gets all the bad press in any industry or field, right? And I think that that's true for our industry, where there's this loud minority that is sensationalized. They overstate claims. They make promises that aren't realistic for a consumer to accept. And I think we've seen this in other fields, but I think it's very relevant. I think the people I'm not just talking about me, but I think there are many other people like me in the industry, at industry trade shows I meet with, that are very genuine and authentic about what we're trying to deliver. And we really are trying to create solutions and answers for consumers the way they're looking at them. And bottom line is, don't listen to the loud minority. It's there are a number of other brands besides us that are trying to do the right thing and get the right products in people's hands. And I think that's more of the majority of the industry than it is the minority of the industry.
And speaking of the loud minority and the Trump administration and things that have to take place, amazing announcement yesterday on the rescheduling of cannabis from a Schedule 1. So it's no longer sitting next to heroin, but now next to Tylenol with codeine in Schedule 3. And the fact that Trump has basically directed Congress to fix the hemp problem that got created, and return to something more common sense. So we're going to have a special episode on Monday at 3 p.m. Yeah, we're going to be talking about that because, and what are the implications, so that we can, instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which is what what happened last month on hemp and CBD and things like CBN and CBG that actually are good for you. You know, the object is to get rid of the gas station weed and get to the positive stuff, right?
Yeah.
You know, the stuff that it was meant to be. But there's a great example of what was never meant to be happened because of opportunity and opportunistic players. But we're going to talk about all those implications on a live special episode on Monday at 3 p.m. And then after the Christmas break, Faith, who do we have coming up next?
Yeah, so we're going to have a little break. And then January 16th, we have Code Health founders Wendy Cohen Osborne and Dr. Lisa Piper. So that'll be really exciting to chat with them. And again, we have a bonus episode Monday, December 22nd, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard. And we're going to ask Brian all the questions that everyone has. Should be a good episode.
There you go. And Phil, just like Vigeant, that's how you pronounce his name.
Yeah,
we got it right. You have been an absolute amazing guest. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to have you back here on Credible Live, and have a great Christmas. Have a wonderful holiday, and blessings to all of our viewers.
Thank you, guys. Great to be here.
Take care.